I'm excited to welcome back treasured guests from episode 34. Can you
Wow.
believe it? Episode 34. Brian Hoffmeyer, who goes by Hoff, to the podcast. Thanks for coming back, Hoff. It's so good to see you. We've been dear friends and colleagues for I won't say how many years now.
A lot of them.
We used to work together in corporate, and now Hoff is still at the company that I left 13 years ago.
That's
Incredible.
it's so crazy how time flies, and everyone knows that. But yeah, I'm very glad to be here. It's hard to believe. Yeah, I was on episode 34, and would you say this is episode 200? I would have never guessed that differential, but really excited to be here. I always love chatting with you.
Yeah, episode 2 something. We're like on 220. I don't know what number this will be exactly, but 220, 230 something. So,
Yeah, there can't be that many podcasts that make it to over 200. So
yeah.
congratulations. That's awesome.
Thank you. Thank you, Hoff. Okay, let's dive in and talk. Give us a little bit of introduction. Tell us what your role is and who you work for and what you do there and all the things.
Yep, sounds great. So I work for Beeline. Beeline is the largest independent vendor management system that is out there. Independent in that we are not owned by a larger software company as many of our competitors are. We are owned by a private equity firm, and we're one of the largest providers in the market in terms of any way you measure what we do, number of clients, the amount of money we have in spend. Since we last talked, we've crossed the threshold of over $1 trillion in spend processed through our systems lifetime, which is just an insane number. And it gives us a lot of insight. It gives us just a tremendous treasure trove of data from which to pull from.
Hoff, I want to interject here for a moment.
Yeah,
Tell us what a vendor
yeah,
management system is.
I was
Okay.
just going to go there. You can think of it as a mashup of an HR system and a procurement system because it has elements of both of those things. And it's specifically designed to manage the end-to-end process for all types of non-employee labor. So contractors, consultants, independent consultants, statement of work, all of those things fall into what we do. And we have specialized processes for each of them for managing that end-to-end from the time someone says, I need something done to getting that something done. Our clients historically have been the buyer of contingent labor. So the organization that has the need for work to get done in some way by someone who is not their employee. I hate the term, by the way, vendor management system, because it doesn't really describe what we do. Yes, we help our clients manage their vendors, but we do so much more. We tried to change our name or what we were called to be an extended workforce platform, but it didn't really go very far because everyone in the industry knows us as a vendor management system. So that's kind of the name that we're stuck with. One of the big things that's changed, and I think is kind of pertinent to this conversation since we last talked, was the scope of companies that Beeline can serve with our platform. So historically, we were serving large enterprises, companies of $1 billion in corporate revenue and above. And we still do that. We do that with what we call our Beeline Enterprise system. But through growth and acquisition, we now have a tool that's called Beeline Professional that is targeted at the mid-market. So companies of $1 billion in corporate revenue and below who are spending significantly less on non-employee labor, but they still need the benefits that we bring. And companies use Beeline to drive a number of those benefits: automation, efficiency, cost savings at times, improved quality. Compliance is huge. Compliance with both internal and external rules and regulations. And ultimately, I think if you talk to buyers of contingent labor, what they're really looking for is visibility into this critical part of the workforce so they can make better decisions about their business.
Amazing. And then tell us what your role is there.
Hat I wear most often is I'm responsible for our global partner ecosystem. In Beeline's view, the non-employee workforce is incredibly complex because of all the parts that are involved in it, all the different ways that people engage non-employees. And so in order to serve our clients, we need partners of a variety of types, both services partners, typically managed service providers. Think of them as recruitment process outsourcing that's specific to contingent labor, a business process outsourcing arrangement. And they're involved in a huge percentage of our client base. About 65% of our clients use an MSP, but we also partner with a variety of technologies that we use to add functionality into our system, things that it doesn't inherently do in and of itself. And that lets us focus on our core mission of being the end-to-end system of record. So I manage all of those relationships globally. But because I've been around for 20 years to put the date on it. I get involved in a lot of other things, opportunities like this, which I absolutely love because I'm very passionate about the importance of what we do, setting sales strategy, product strategy, how we go to market, etc.
Yeah. Okay, amazing. So your vantage point is so unique for those of us who are independent consultants because you see the macro trends and the way that our enterprise clients, our mid-sized clients, our even small-sized clients, I think, are seeing and looking at the way they want to leverage external resources, including independent consultants. So, I'm so excited to have you here on the episode today. Plus, we've been friends for
Exactly.
ages, so long, so many years. It's always fun to have a
And,
conversation.
and one bit of additional context that may be helpful to the listeners in terms of those clients, I
Mm,
talked about sort of size of organization from a revenue perspective, but we also have good visibility into most major verticals that are out there because
mm.
contingent labor and hence the need for a system like ours is vertical agnostic in our view, also pretty geographically diverse. So we're a global company. We're serving clients in 100 plus countries around the world, and so we're seeing a lot of things in all the major sort of buying regions.
That's so helpful. We're so lucky to have you today. All right, let's start
Hopefully, I'll
at
live up to that.
for sure you'll live up to that. Okay, let's start at a high level. Tell us what trends are you seeing right now with corporate clients engaging external talent? Are
Mhm.
things shifting, slowing down, accelerating? What does it look like from a macro perspective?
Yeah, so I think a couple of things to talk about, kind of good news and bad news, similar to things that we've seen, in other indexes that cover contingent labor, like Staffing Industry Analyst has an index they do with Bullhorn that's been basically flat in terms of sort of year over year, month over month spend for a couple of years. Some ups and downs in some ways, but when in aggregate, relatively flat, little growth. We see that pretty broadly across our diverse client base as well. That's not a great story. And I think the industry in general was expecting, as we transitioned into a new year and a new administration, that might change and we see a return to some of the growth that we saw in the second half of the 2010s and certainly in the early years of COVID. And that part hasn't happened. And in some ways, like those early years of the COVID pandemic should just be stricken from the record because they sort of reset the baseline artificially high, in my view. So that's like not that's sort of a little doom and gloom. I think what we are seeing, which is really interesting to the types of folks that are listening to this podcast, as I understand it, is a shift in a good way, a shift towards use of independent consultants, especially at the higher end. Folks who are true experts in their field, who are specialized in some unique skill set. They're great at advisory work. They may do fractional work, as a fractional CMO or CRO or whatever it is. That is a shift that is to the positive and is growing very quickly. And I think there's an immense opportunity there. And those are jobs, in my view, that are going to be amongst the last jobs where AI is going to replace them, and probably won't ever really be, because I think humans will evolve and just do other stuff. I hope for all of us that we do, like we always have throughout history. So I think that's kind of a good thing. And then I think there's this corporate realization that independent contractors do exist and they're important to businesses of all types, sizes, verticals, geographies, and they need to get their hands around them because like historically 10 years ago or whatever, you asked a company if they used independent contractors and they'd be like, nope, we don't do that at all.
Mm, yeah.
It's never really been true. I think most companies have. It was always sort of swept under the rug, and I think that probably represents both an opportunity and a challenge for independent consultants, because like in some ways, like having more corporate visibility may
Mm,
create constraints. You may not be able to go to your friend, the SVP of whatever, who's hired you repeatedly in the same way and not have that be visible. But I think on balance, it creates, I think is the advantage of of creating more opportunity, making things official, and in even medium-sized organizations, I think that's pretty important to growth and legitimacy.
From what I've been seeing in much smaller data sets, obviously, than yours, much smaller data sets than yours. But to your point, those buyers, those decision makers who are bringing in independent consultants, when they need that type of expertise or advisory, tend to figure out ways to make it happen, regardless of what those corporate rules might be.
Sure. Yeah, because it's really about something that is absolutely business critical. And, that's one of the things I love to, I guess, preach about is this idea. We say this to our clients all the time. People in procurement, people in HR are typically our stakeholders, but I think this is applicable to independent consultants too, is how is what you're doing tied to some larger corporate, people like, to use one of the benefits I talked about earlier, people, say, I want more visibility into my contingent workforce. Okay, great. But why? What is that serving? What corporate growth goal, important project about a new product or whatever, what is that serving? And really, like it's that, you probably taught me this early on, is like asking why over and over again to really get to that core business need. And I think that's something it's probably 101 stuff, but like for independent consultants is truly understanding the thing that they do, what is it driving? I'm a fractional CRO. Okay, obviously the company wants to grow, but what's the thing that's behind that?
Yeah, what are they trying to accomplish
Yeah,
through the growth?
yeah, yeah.
Going back to those fundamentals, it takes a lot of reminding
Mhm.
because we get trapped in a lot of bells and whistles, but
Yeah,
going back to those types of fundamentals are so important, especially when there are a lot of perceived or real threats in the market,
yeah,
and trying to weave through those can be so valuable, just to go back to the basics and stand out through that in
yeah.
that way.
And I think that that's an opportunity for the independent consultant to truly differentiate and show their expertise, because I work with a lot of staffing suppliers, and like this
Mm.
isn't meant to be disparaging at all of what they do, but I think a lot of times they don't think about those fundamentals, and when asked what their differentiators are, they go to sort of tired things about, well, our people make the difference, and like, okay, like that's a really really hard thing to prove. And you go back to your marketing 101 definition of what a differentiator is, it's got to be easy to prove. Like that's one of the
Mm.
key things. And so things like that aren't, but like true expertise where you're tying it in, I think can be. And so that's a real opportunity for somebody who, it may be more expensive than outsourcing to a traditional staffing firm, to show the why that should be part of the sourcing strategy.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us from your vantage point, as you've been thinking about watching enterprise
Mhm.
clients make decisions about what types of resources they're going to engage, whether they're going to engage a contractor or their own internal
Mhm.
employee or a consultant. What do you see when it's a kind of a broad question, but tell us what you see from your vantage point as they're
Yeah,
making those decisions.
I think this is one of the really sort of interesting things. I guess it shows I'm nerdy that I think this is interesting, but it's ultimately the question you're asking is, how should work get done?
Mm.
And so as a buyer, of non-employee services, actually not even that, like as a manager, taking it back, like of people or of a department within a company, when I need to get work done, it's not a simple answer of how it gets done.
Mhm.
There's so many different options, both internal, like do I have bandwidth within my own staff? Are there people within my organization that are on the bench that could come in? Are there people we're going to be letting go? Their skills could be applicable here. And then you start to add in the external workforce, all of the different elements and ways that could be, I'm an outsource to a staffing supplier on an hourly basis. I'm going to outsource to a large big four consultancy or some other niche consultancy on a statement of work basis, or I'm going to bring in an independent or consortium even of independent.
Mm.
Those are hard decisions to make. And so one of the things we're really talking about is giving folks the tools to do that, and combining the data that we have and data that our partners have in some cases on that, plus corporate rules and philosophies, into that decision-making process. And what I mean by philosophies there is like some companies want to use a lot of contingent labor and others don't. And that shifts, they get in, we've seen this happen. A new CTO comes in and that CTO is like, you know what, I don't believe in the use of contractors. And all of a sudden all the contractors are gone or converted to employees, so like, and being aware of those things is important for anybody that's trying to supply work into a company. Is what do they believe about how work should get done?
Yeah, I love that question.
Yeah,
it's an interesting question, because at the end of the day, selling independent consulting work where we only need a handful of clients in a given year, sometimes only one or two, is so relationship based.
mm-hmm.
And so having that type of conversation to understand what those potential clients, how they think about allocating work and getting work done, and what those drivers are kind of philosophically, and where internal workforce is leveraged and where the company may be open to leveraging external workforce and why.
Yeah, and even helping your stakeholder that you're selling to navigate those things, make them think about questions they should ask within their own company, but even things that you as an independent consultant have seen work other places. Because you may be talking to a hiring manager who's never done this before. It's not their day to day. And it's that they're worried about the thing that needs to get done. They're worried about budget. They're worried about internal processes that they may not completely understand or agree with. And like you're giving them, becoming that trusted advisor in the selling process is hugely important.
Yeah. I mean, you bring up something that's so important, because sometimes we think, well, we don't have the authority or the permission to give advice until we have signed a contract with the client, versus the way to one of the best ways to get to the point where you have signed a contract with the client is to treat that as an advisory process.
Yeah.
Where you, at the end of the process, you might not be the best solution for the clients. And it may be some time spent that's not billable, but at the same time, it helps to build that relationship and over the course of time, build up trust, and also to build up the ability to qualify clients better on your end.
And a network, because that, that person you're talking to, even if like your point's a really good one, like they don't end up bringing you on, but they remember you and mention you to their friend who does. Some of that goes back to, I don't know if I always believe in this sales methodology, but I do think it works, like this idea of the challenger sale. If you teach somebody that something that they didn't know was a problem that you can uniquely solve, that puts you in a really good spot.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's part of the definition. That's what I always love to say. Sales feels really challenging for most of us as consultants. We'd rather just deliver the work, but it requires so many consulting skills to be good at sales.
Yes, very much so.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us, when you look at what you're seeing right now in terms of funds that are being allocated to external work and statements of work, project-based work that independent consultants would be doing, is there anything that you're seeing from a trend perspective there, Hoff?
I think one is that there is a big shift towards things that are based on defined outcomes versus just paying somebody on an hourly, daily, or whatever basis. And I think there are a couple of reasons for that. One is it's become easier in a lot of states, a lot of places, maybe not in every country, but certainly in the United States, to bring on an employee. And if that employee doesn't work out or your business needs to change, you can get rid of them. There's a lot of at-will employment states. But I think more importantly, it's the shifting of the risk. You're shifting the risk for the delivery to an expert, whether it's a large firm or an individual. That's very helpful because, if you're just bringing on folks that are hourly, you're still responsible for what they're doing on an hour by hour basis in the ultimate delivery. But if you can bring in that expert, that's something that's really appealing, especially in cases where, because I think one of the biggest ongoing needs of contingent work is expertise, skill sets that the company does not have themselves, either because they just don't have them or because the folks that do have them don't want to work on a full-time basis for one organization. And so I think that is one of the big things that's driving that shift towards, because independent consultants in this vein, to me, fall into a statement of work services procurement kind of category for the most part. I mean, you may be getting paid hourly, I guess, but that's certainly a warning sign that you may not be as independent as you think you are. So I think that shifting of risk is a big driver.
Which is so good to hear, because so often I talk to consultants who say the clients just want to pay by the hour or maybe by the day if they're feeling really progressive.
Yeah, sure.
And so it feels challenging at times to get over that hump of no, this is the way that pricing looks in a way that benefits both of us. I'm not here working by that, incentivized to be charging by the hour and work more hours to get paid more. And at the same time, as an enterprise client or mid-sized client, have line of sight and understanding of what the overall cost is going to be and a result, like you're saying.
Agreed. And I mean, I get that why that seems easier at first, because it is probably an easier sale. I think it creates more business risk, because what could happen is, let's say that independent contracting is not part of the scope of a MSP run program, and you get an hourly engagement, and eventually procurement and the MSP becomes aware of it. There's going to be a really bright lens focused on you to make sure that that couldn't be done cheaper by bringing in somebody from a staffing company at a much lower hourly rate. Somebody's going to look at your resume and compare what they think it looks like you are to what their rate card says you should pay it and X, and be like, what, we could save $50 an hour by going to our preferred staffing supplier, versus if it's defined in a detailed statement of work with deliverables, that's much harder to do.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, and for some consultants, they might not be working with clients who have that much sophistication. A lot of enterprise clients do, where they've got these kinds of rate cards and ability to see this data. And so you don't want to be commoditized to the point of, to the exact example you just gave, which is comparing rate to rate or overall cost to overall cost. And whoever's looking at that data, not seeing what's behind it and knowing what the actual results are.
Exactly.
Avoiding that all entirely is what you're saying by switching it to project-based or value-based pricing, which is something we talk a lot about on this podcast. And
I think the one thing related to that, it's not holistic by any means yet, but 5 or 10 years ago, that kind of expertise to do that sort of analysis was probably concentrated in much larger organizations, but that has trickled down. And systems like ours, services like those provided by my MSP partners, as well as internal expertise, has trickled down to smaller organizations. So just thinking, because I only serve companies of less than 1,000 employees, I'm not at risk. I don't think that's as true now as it was a few years ago, and will be even less true in the future.
Yeah. So it's really important to assume that your client, so if we're talking to the listener, assume that your client has some form of a rate card, has some form of a structure for the way that they engage external labor and workforce, and make sure that that's, as you're thinking about that, as you're taking your sales process into account and the way that you're ultimately pricing.
And hell, they can go to ChatGPT and just ask it questions, and it's gonna tell them something, whether it's right or wrong, but it's gonna tell them something that you're gonna have to compete against.
Yeah, that's true. So tell us now, what do you see as you look at statements of work and independent consultant type scenarios going through your software? Can you give us any insight into what types of projects you're seeing getting approved internally with enterprise and mid-sized clients, and what might not be getting approved? What does it look like on the other side?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's similar themes to what we've been talking about. It's stuff where there is true expertise that is tied to the core business mission. I mean, I think that's going to be the easiest thing to get approved. And I think things that add value beyond the obvious part of the work that's going to be done. So when you and I were prepping for this, I was giving you examples of firms that are doing work that's in between a statement of work and a contingent hourly engagement, but they're adding in additional expertise and value. So I always feel like these things are really basic, but what is it that you do that is unique, that is going to differentiate your service? Maybe even if it's something that you're, like isn't, it's not even you're charging for it per se. I mean, obviously you are, but like you can make the client think that it's a value add that they get for quote unquote free. I think those are the things that are going to get through much more easily.
Yeah.
And then, and again, it's understanding like that business environment. What are the things that are challenging to the company? Like one of the things we see a lot is the resources a company is competing for are much less tightly tied to their core business than they were because of the ongoing automation, digitization of the world. Yes, I'm a bank or a hardware retailer or what have you, but I need a data scientist. Like 20 years ago, that wasn't probably the case. But now I'm a bank and I'm competing against for that data scientist from somebody who's not my business competitor. They're my competitor for resources.
Yeah. Going back without sharing any of the specifics you shared with me before we started this episode, you were giving an example of, and I think this is really relevant to those listeners who might have a boutique consultancy or even some subcontractors on their bench, to be able to offer, to take what you were just describing and maybe give it another layer of detail, to be able to sell to their clients, some form of process optimization where some of the subcontractors might be executing the work, but then you as a consultant are doing advisory type work that is either embedded in the overall fee or somehow broken out as advisory, where you're helping to optimize the actual delivery that in execution that's happening. And then ultimately that might be taken over by some longer term resources or full-time employees.
Like when you think about like fractional CMO or fractional CRO, like initially you may be, to your point, providing subcontractors who are doing some of the work, but part of your advisory is going to be like, here are these things that you can automate going forward by bringing in systems of various types, a CRM or all kinds of amazing tools for, sales automation using AI to predict sales success that like reduce the need for people. And so in some ways you're like, you're writing yourself out of that part of your job, but hopefully elevating other things that you do, because like it's that lower level stuff that is going to be automated and taken over by AI and other tools. So I think in almost any example you can see that. You're a fractional CFO, and there's examples I can think of there, in that kind of world.
Yeah, absolutely. And in many ways that's our job, is to work ourselves out of a job, right? As a consultant.
Yeah.
Our job should not be to be there forever.
Yeah.
Our job should be there to leave them better and move on to the next client.
Something you said made me think about this. I think one of the interesting trends we're seeing with independence is this idea of consortiums of related independents, where, because there's some projects as a true independent, like a single person, you can't compete for that project because it's a massive project that needs multiple skill sets, some of which you don't have, some of which just one person can't do. And so being able to say, you know what, like I realize I'm competing against some large consultancy, but I've got this consortium of folks that I've worked with in the past that we're going to create a temporary team in time to solve this need. Like that's a great strategy, especially for larger organizations.
Yeah, one of my questions for you was, how to stand out, because there are organizations that choose to work with McKinsey or at least a boutique or, or Bain, or at least a boutique consultancy that might have a name attached to it. Because, I mean, if we're just being honest, if something goes wrong, they can easily blame them versus the consultant who did it, as an example. So to your point of taking that route of building out a consortium, and at least a loose consortium, I often advise against partnerships. They rarely work formal partnerships, but to build out a consortium where resources can come and go when it makes sense for them and when it makes sense for you, and you're able to go to market with a much broader and deeper solution, can be incredibly differentiating.
You're right. It doesn't have to be a permanent arrangement or even
Yeah.
necessarily like formally papered, as long as the client has a way to engage each independent separately, and you're like, we're going to work together, and here's this overriding governance that we're going to use. And like, I think those kinds of consortiums, like we've seen this in our own industry, it's also a business strategy for growth, in that, at times you may get a project and you're fully tapped, but if you've got a consortium of other like-minded people that you can feed business to, in expectation that they do the same thing in reverse, that's a legitimate way to grow and create stability.
Yeah, absolutely. And it makes it a little less lonely too.
It does. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
A lot of us like to work independently for a reason, but it does get lonely as well. So having that as one option, one of many options to go to market, can be really valuable.
Yeah.
When you look at independent consultants' businesses, Hoff, tell us what you see. What kind of mistakes do you see independents making that might be costing them opportunities?
I think, to expand on one we've already hit on a bit, we talked a little bit about assuming that what you do isn't going to be subject to corporate controls. I think one related to that is being aware of, what is that environment within the organization. So in our world, there's kind of two models with, companies that buy our software, how they manage that software. They do it internally, or they do it externally through an MSP. Both of those, internal, what we would call a program office, external MSP, are doing very similar things. Not being aware of the existence of that type of organization and not assuming that it may both help or hinder you is a huge mistake. And so understanding, like, we've got some really incredibly valuable MSP partners that deliver huge benefits to our clients, and understanding how to work with them is really, really important, because a lot of times they are the gatekeepers. Like I tell traditional staffing suppliers this all the time, like, you may be successful at working around these folks at times, but eventually it's going to come back to bite you in most cases. And so be surprised by that's a bad thing.
Yeah. And so it can be as simple as, a lot of times in the sales process, we forget to ask some of the very basic questions, like how does this, okay, great. You want to move forward with and engage my services. You're going to accept my proposal. What does that look like? What are the steps?
Get approved?
Who's going to approve? How long? Yeah. How long does it usually take? Are there levels? Yeah. At what level can you approve? Because it would make a lot of sense to break it up into two statements of work, for example, to stay under that level rather than starting to go up the chain to finance. Like those sorts of things. And to your point, typical payment terms and insurance requirements, all of those things that can really trip up a process that should take hours, maybe, let's say days, but often it can turn into months because of some surprises that we either make assumptions, or we don't feel like pushing, or we don't want to seem too eager, whatever the reason is. And then we end up, really having a big gap in revenue that wasn't necessary.
And again, like, to one of the themes we've talked about, even asking those questions of the person who is buying your services, they may not know. Like, right.
That's right.
Like, I don't know, if you need access to some corporate system to deliver your thing, like saying to the person, what are the processes that are needed to get me access to that? Folks often don't know, because they only onboard a new employee, I don't know, once a year on average, right? And people just forget those things. And so making them think about that is going to put you in, is going to serve you well, because it's making you that advisor.
Yeah. Sometimes I talk about this on the podcast. I have a corporate client. I always have one corporate client just to stay fresh in the work that I coach on. And they happen to use Beeline as the tool to manage external workforce. And I'm constantly explaining once, when someone engages me, I'm constantly explaining to them how their own internal process works to hire me.
Right.
Because it'll be a lot faster for me to explain it, because now I know I've been through it many times. So I know what it looks like. But for
Yeah,
consultants to really, be able to ask those questions so that ultimately they can help their their buyer, their decision maker, their stakeholder, to engage them and get them on board, which is what they want, and move through
exactly.
the internal
And
quagmire.
even if it's like you're doing repeated work for this client, so you really understand the processes. But even if
Yeah.
you're not, like a key question is like, do you have an MSP? Do you have a VMS? Because
Yeah.
in a lot of ways, like the processes are going to have a lot of commonality
Yeah.
across clients, and just knowing that and being able to advise them based on what you've seen, even if it's a different VMS, a different MSP, you're going to
Yeah.
be directionally corrected at worst.
Yeah. Or even if they don't have one of those,
Yeah,
really understanding the process.
right.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell us, if you were an independent consultant right now, how would you be positioning yourself to stand out to clients?
Hopefully, my boss isn't listening. That's a really
I
good
made
one.
you do
Yeah.
it.
Trying to think of something that I guess I haven't already said. Yeah, I mean, I guess I have a. Well, actually, I'll go another level deeper. I think one is really focusing on your skills versus your titles,
Mm,
because that is a big thing people are talking about. You look at somebody that's been in the business world for a
mm,
lot of years, they can do a lot of different things. And so, teaching somebody like, hey, yeah, like maybe especially for like a new independent consultant who's been in a corporate job for a long time and has had certain titles associated, and maybe even similar titles with increasing levels of experience, really showing someone how they can pick out the skills that you have from that you know so the job title that you wore may not be exactly what they're engaging on, but you've got this transferable skills, and companies are using skills based algorithms as part of their processes. They're running resumes, LinkedIn
mm,
profiles, proposals through that to help
mm.
judge whether that person's going to be a good fit.
Yeah. I love to also just turn it on its head and say, this is not a resume anymore that we're presenting.
Yeah,
We're presenting, really the outcomes that that the client is looking for.
yeah,
And then to your point, what might the skill sets and the experience, the past experiences, even case studies be to stand out amongst other consultants, if they're even if it's even a competitive bid situation. It might, like, ideally you're not in a competitive situation as a consultant, and you're walking a potential client through a process to help them scope
yeah.
out the work and
Yeah, you're
be
trying to
able
show how
to
there
see
is
that you're
not a
the
competitor
person.
to you. Yeah,
Yeah.
but in
Yeah.
many cases there are. But
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So, Hoff, as we're wrapping up here today, tell us, I know we covered such a wide range of a wide swath here,
yeah,
but tell us, is there anything else that we didn't cover that you wanted to share with the listeners today?
no, I mean, the time flew by. I mean,
Yeah.
I guess I would just say, hopefully this doesn't sound trite, but like keep on doing what you're doing, because
Mm.
I'm surrounded by a lot of amazing, independence in my life, and I'm in awe of the different skill sets that people have to bring, because you're like, I mean, one person band, right? You're doing every element of the business.
Yeah.
Um, you know, keep plugging away at it, because I think it truly does drive value in the corporate world of any size, and will continue to.
Thank you. We'll put that as a motivator,
Yeah,
a motivator for sure. Some days are hard and some days are great.
for sure.
So, yes, that's so good to have that perspective. Thanks for being here,
Of course,
and we'll have you on again in another 100 episodes or
perfect.
so.
Always
So
glad
good.
to be on. Thank you so much.